Have you ever wondered what truly hides behind the shimmering walls of a legendary ancient court, where power looked divine on the outside but rotted in the shadows within? The Babylonian courts were admired for their grandeur, their towers, their gold, their rituals of splendor. But behind those dazzling impressions lived a world of secrets so decadent, so unsettling, that even the chroniclers of the era chose silence over truth. Imagine walking through corridors where every smile is calculated, every gesture is rehearsed, and every whispered rumor can decide whether someone rises to glory or disappears without a trace. The luxury was real, but it was also a mask, a distraction carefully crafted to conceal the machinery of fear operating beneath it. To step inside those courts was to enter a place where reality bent to the will of the powerful. Those who dared to question, resist, or even hesitate faced consequences that were not written in any official tablet. Behind the ceremonial feasts, behind the elaborate garments, existed a darker pulse that controlled everything. The obsession with absolute loyalty, the paranoia that soaked every decision, and the rituals designed not to celebrate life, but to test obedience through intimidation. When people speak of ancient Babylon, they often recall its gardens and myths, but few dare to explore the labyrinth of brutality woven inside its palaces, where punishments could be invented on the spot and alliances were built upon fear more than respect. This is where the real story begins, in the fractures beneath the marble and gold, where the most hidden secrets flourished. And once you understand what truly happened behind those closed doors, you start to see why so many scribes chose to alter, diminish, or simply erase entire events from their records. The truth was dangerous. The truth was explosive. The truth could destroy reputations and kingdoms. But today, we pull aside that ancient veil and reveal what was never meant to survive time. What you are about to uncover challenges everything we think we know about power, cruelty, and the psychology of rulers who believed they were untouchable. Before we go deeper into the heart of these forbidden episodes, tell me something. Have you ever felt that history hides far more than it reveals? If this opening stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments, leave your like to help this investigation reach more people, and make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss what comes next, because what you will discover now may surprise you, and we are only beginning to peel back the layers of what truly happened inside those Babylonian courts, where each secret leads directly into the next. The deeper you move into the inner chambers of the Babylonian courts, the more you begin to sense a system that operated beneath the surface of official power. What looked like organized governance was, in truth, a carefully engineered machine of silent punishments and invisible pressures. Every noble who entered those corridors understood that survival depended not only on loyalty, but on the ability to read unspoken rules, navigate hidden hierarchies, and anticipate the whims of those seated above them. The dazzling ceremonies shown to outsiders existed only to distract from the atmosphere of constant surveillance that shaped the lives of everyone who served the throne. Within these elite circles, punishment rarely appeared in the direct, brutal form that ancient tales sometimes romanticize. Instead, it came wrapped in subtle gestures. A missing invitation to a private feast could signal impending exile. A sudden reassignment to a distant province could mark the beginning of one's erasure. Even a simple delay in being addressed by a superior could publicly undermine someone's authority. These indirect mechanisms preserved the image of order while slowly suffocating those who failed to conform. No one dared question such decisions because questioning itself was interpreted as rebellion. This silent machinery created an environment where fear became a language of its own. Servants and nobles alike learned to interpret every shift in tone, every pause in a conversation, every unexpected change in routine. People lived in a constant state of anticipation, unsure whether they were being tested, watched, or targeted. The king's advisors perfected this psychological weaponry, ensuring that obedience was maintained, not just through force, but through uncertainty. The possibility of punishment was often more powerful than the punishment itself. Those who thrived in this atmosphere did so by becoming masters of duplicity. Publicly, they displayed unwavering devotion to the crown. Privately, they navigated intricate webs of alliances, always prepared to shift loyalties at the slightest tremor. The court became a stage where every smile could hide a threat, every compliment could mask a trap, and every gesture was an opportunity to gain or lose favor. The most skilled players manipulated this system to eliminate rivals without ever raising a blade. They understood that the court's cruelty worked best when it left no marks on the body, only on the mind. Over time, this invisible structure of control became more influential than the official laws carved into tablets. It seeped into daily life, shaping the rhythms of the palace and determining who would rise to prominence or fade into obscurity. Even those closest to the king were not exempt. In fact, they often lived under the greatest pressure, aware that any misstep could be interpreted as disloyalty. And as these silent punishments intensified, tensions within the palace grew, revealing a darker truth about power in Babylon, that maintaining authority often required the creation of perpetual instability. Yet beneath all these calculated moves, a deeper force was taking shape, one that would soon erupt into highly ritualized practices designed to enforce submission in ways far more direct than the quiet punishments that ruled daily life. And as these rituals expanded, they exposed an entirely new layer of control, one that was far more dangerous and far more revealing about the true nature of the Babylonian elite. As the currents of silent discipline shaped the Babylonian courts, there emerged another layer of control, far more ritualized, far more deliberate, and crafted with unsettling precision. These were not punishments hidden behind subtle gestures or whispered decisions. Instead, they were ceremonial practices designed to reinforce the hierarchy, reminding every noble, servant, and advisor exactly where they stood. These rituals were not publicly documented, yet they were deeply ingrained in the culture of the palace, forming an unofficial code of obedience that operated beneath the laws carved in stone. To witness them was to understand the true nature of power in ancient Babylon, a power rooted not just in authority, but in psychological submission. Those selected to participate in these rituals were not chosen randomly. The court observed every detail of behavior, searching for the slightest hesitation, any sign that loyalty might not be absolute. Once selected, the individual would be summoned to an inner chamber, one deliberately designed to distort perception. Its walls carried engraved symbols of divine authority, reminding the participant that the king's power was not merely political but sacred. The air itself seemed to tighten with expectation, and the rituals unfolded in silence, broken only by the chants of designated attendants whose role was to detach the participant from ordinary reality. The purpose of these ceremonies was not physical torment, though some rituals included elements that tested endurance. Their true purpose was mental conditioning, ensuring that obedience would not merely be enforced, but internalized. Participants were required to reenact symbolic gestures, offer spoken declarations, or perform tasks meant to demonstrate their submission to the crown. These acts were theatrical in form, but deadly serious in intent. A misplaced gesture could be interpreted as defiance. A falter in tone could be seen as a challenge to authority. Every detail was scrutinized, and the consequences of failure lingered long after the ritual ended. Even high-ranking officials feared these secret rites. They understood that being summoned did not necessarily mean condemnation, but it certainly meant evaluation. and in the Babylonian courts, evaluation was always a threat. The rituals cultivated a deep psychological imprint, ensuring that those who emerged from them carried a renewed sense of vulnerability. They returned to their duties outwardly composed, yet inwardly shaken, fully aware that their fate could shift at any moment. The court valued this uncertainty because it created a pliable environment, one where individuals became instruments of the system rather than challengers to it. These rights also served another function. They allowed those in power to identify potential rivals long before open conflict could arise. By observing how individuals reacted under symbolic pressure, the king's advisors could classify them as loyal, unstable, ambitious, or dangerous. It was a method of surveillance disguised as spirituality, a blend of religious symbolism and political strategy that blurred the line between devotion and coercion. The rituals created a hierarchy within the hierarchy, dividing the court not only by rank but by psychological resilience. But while these secret practices reinforced obedience among the elites, they also hinted at something far more brutal lurking beneath the surface. Because when symbolic discipline failed, when a noble defied the expectations or a servant broke the unspoken code, the Babylonian courts did not hesitate to escalate their methods. And the next layer of control was anything but symbolic, revealing how extreme these practices could become when the palace needed to send a message that could never be ignored. When symbolic obedience failed to bend the will of an individual, the Babylonian courts shifted without hesitation into methods far more explicit, far more punishing, and crafted to leave an imprint that no one inside the palace would dare forget. These punishments were not administered in public squares for the masses to witness. Instead, they took place in controlled environments deep within the palace, ensuring that fear circulated only among those whose loyalty mattered most. The servants who moved silently through the halls, and the nobles whose ambitions occasionally reached beyond their limits. These acts functioned as cautionary tales, retold in hushed tones by those who had seen too much. The most common targets were the low-ranking servants, individuals whose proximity to the private chambers of the elite made them both essential and expendable. A misplaced glance, a delayed response, or an overheard conversation could be interpreted as a breach of protocol. Once accused, these servants were not confronted with lengthy trials or appeals. Instead, they were escorted by palace guards into narrow rooms designed not for physical torture alone, but for psychological unraveling. Darkness, confinement, and isolation were used as tools to strip away composure, and those who emerged from these spaces were rarely the same. Some returned to their duties shattered and obedient, while others simply vanished from the palace records. But the court reserved its harshest punishments for those whose positions gave them influence: nobles who dared question a decree, advisors who hesitated too long before agreeing with the king, or officials whose alliances shifted suspiciously could find themselves the subjects of a punishment engineered with precision. These actions were theatrical in their cruelty, designed to communicate a message to the entire court. No status was high enough to protect anyone from the consequences of defiance. Sometimes the punishment took the form of abrupt dispossession, stripping a noble of land, titles, or wealth. Other times it involved a staged humiliation, orchestrated so that other members of the elite would witness the fall and absorb its warning. These displays created a chilling effect across the palace. Servants moved with rigid discipline, afraid that even their shadows might betray them. Nobles acted with exaggerated loyalty, all too aware that missteps could dismantle their legacy in a single moment. The palace guards became silent executors of the king's will, their presence alone a reminder of the invisible boundaries no one dared cross. And somewhere within the walls, scribes recorded the sanitized versions of these events, careful never to reveal the true severity of what occurred behind sealed doors. Such punishments served a dual purpose. They eliminated immediate threats while simultaneously reinforcing the hierarchy, ensuring that everyone, from the most powerful advisor to the youngest servant, understood that authority in Babylon demanded not only obedience, but reverence. And as these brutal lessons spread through the palace, they paved the way for even darker practices, ones that pushed the boundaries of loyalty and fear far beyond what tradition had ever intended. Because once cruelty becomes a tool of governance, the threshold for what is considered acceptable begins to dissolve, leaving space for rituals and acts that no official chronicle would ever dare to include. If this glimpse into the hidden punishments of the Babylonian courts stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell me what you believe drove such extreme measures behind the palace walls, as understanding these reactions helps illuminate the depths we are about to explore next. As the harsher punishments tightened their grip on the palace, the Babylonian courts evolved into a dense web of intrigue, where every alliance, every whispered conversation, and every exchanged glance carried weight. Power circulated not through official decrees alone, but through a network of personal loyalties and hidden agendas that shifted like sand beneath the feet of those who dared navigate them. In these corridors, influence was a currency far more volatile than gold, and trust was a luxury few could afford. The elites understood that open conflict was dangerous. The real battles were fought in coded phrases, subtle gestures, and carefully timed decisions that shaped the fate of entire factions. In this environment, alliances were rarely born out of friendship or shared vision. Instead, they emerged from necessity, mutual protection, or the temporary convenience of dismantling a common rival. A noble who aligned himself with a powerful advisor could rise overnight, gaining access to the king's inner circle. But that same noble could fall just as quickly if the alliance shifted or if someone produced information, real or fabricated, that cast suspicion on his motives. Rumors were weapons, sharpened by those who knew how to use them. A single accusation, whispered at the right moment, could unravel years of careful positioning. The scribes, though officially neutral, played a subtle role in this delicate ecosystem. Their records shaped perception, and perception shaped power. A scribe who emphasized a noble's contribution could elevate him. One who omitted his achievements or highlighted minor errors could destroy his standing. Some scribes became unofficial agents for certain factions, altering narratives with just enough plausibility to avoid detection. Their influence was quiet yet profound, and many nobles feared the stylus more than the sword. Even the royal family was not immune to this network of influence. Princes, siblings, and extended relatives often engaged in their own political maneuvering, attempting to position themselves favorably in the eyes of the king or the priests. Internal competition thrived, for proximity to the throne meant access to divine authority and material wealth. The closer one rose, the more dangerous the climb became, as rivals monitored every gesture for signs of ambition that might threaten their own standing. Behind these ongoing intrigues lay a deeper truth. The system sustained itself through constant tension. No one could become complacent. Everyone was forced to remain alert, calculating, ready to adapt. The courts relied on this instability to maintain control, for a divided elite was easier to manipulate than a unified one. And so, new narratives were seeded, suspicions amplified, and relationships tested. The palace became a living organism sustained by rivalry, its survival dependent on a steady stream of internal conflict. This atmosphere did not simply create anxiety, it created opportunity for those bold enough to exploit it. Some individuals learned to navigate the currents with extraordinary finesse, manipulating perceptions, forging temporary loyalties, and eliminating threats before anyone suspected their involvement. These players operated in the shadows, far from the ceremonial halls, crafting outcomes that appeared natural to outsiders but were anything but accidental. Their actions rarely left visible traces, yet their impact shaped the course of the kingdom. But even this intricate web of intrigue was only one layer of the dark reality hidden inside the Babylonian courts. Beneath the political maneuvering lay practices far more visceral, rituals designed not merely to influence power, but to prove devotion through acts that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. And as these rituals spread through the palace, they revealed just how deeply cruelty had seeped into the foundations of Babylon's most sacred halls. As intrigue and silent punishments shaped the rhythm of daily life inside the Babylonian courts, a far more theatrical and unsettling tradition flourished in the shadows. The cruel spectacles designed to demonstrate absolute loyalty to the king. These events were not open to the general public, nor were they mere entertainment. They functioned as tests of allegiance, orchestrated with precision to measure how far individuals were willing to go to affirm their devotion. Participation was never optional. When the king or his highest advisors summoned a noble, an officer, or even a high-ranking servant to one of these rituals, the summons carried the weight of destiny. The setting alone was enough to unsettle even the most confident participants. These spectacles took place in secluded chambers deep within the palace, rooms adorned with vivid murals depicting divine retribution, mythical beasts, and scenes of cosmic judgment. Oil lamps cast flickering shadows that distorted the images, making them appear to writhe in the half-light. The architecture of the room was intended to unsettle the mind, enforcing the idea that the participant was stepping outside the laws of men and into a realm where the king's authority was absolute. Priests and attendants stood silently along the walls, their stillness adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The rituals themselves varied depending on what the court wished to assess. Some required acts of physical endurance, where the participant had to withstand heat, exhaustion, or prolonged discomfort while maintaining a composed expression. Others demanded symbolic sacrifices, breaking objects of personal importance, swearing sacred oaths, or performing elaborate gestures meant to evoke submission before the throne. There were also psychological trials, where participants were confronted with illusions, chants, or staged accusations designed to provoke fear or confusion. Each trial served a single purpose: to strip away the protective layers of pride and leave the individual exposed, revealing their true loyalty beneath the surface. Those who performed well could strengthen their position in the court, sometimes earning increased trust or receiving subtle signs of favor. But success was not always measured by perfection. The king and his advisors looked for obedience, not brilliance. A participant who endured hardship without complaint demonstrated reliability, while one who resisted or hesitated revealed dangerous tendencies. Even a momentary flicker of doubt could change the trajectory of a career or a family's future. The elite understood that these spectacles were not games. They were assessments disguised as rituals, judgments veiled by ceremony. Yet there was another layer to these spectacles, one rarely spoken aloud. They served not only to test individuals, but also to reinforce the hierarchy among observers. Those present as witnesses were forced to confront the reality that the system demanded sacrifices, and that their own turn could come at any moment. Watching a rival kneel before the throne might bring satisfaction, but it also carried a chilling reminder. Obedience was the only shield against becoming the next subject of scrutiny. Over time, these events began to take on a life of their own. The court's appetite for displays of loyalty grew, and the boundaries of what was acceptable or necessary expanded. Some rituals became more extreme, their symbolism darker, their demands harsher, and as these spectacles intensified, the distinction between ceremony and punishment blurred. What began as a demonstration of loyalty gradually transformed into a proving ground where power was asserted through fear. But even these unsettling rituals paled in comparison to the practices the elite worked hardest to conceal. Because beneath the ceremonial chambers and the official halls existed another layer of the palace, hidden from all but a select few, where secrecy was not a precaution but a requirement. It was there that the most forbidden acts unfolded, shaping the reputation of the Babylonian courts in ways no scribe dared record. Hidden far beneath the ceremonial chambers, deeper than the corridors where punishments and loyalty trials took place, existed a realm within the Babylonian courts that only a select circle of the elite ever entered. These were not simply rooms or halls, but controlled environments built for secrecy, designed so that nothing seen within them could leak into the outer palace. Here, the most forbidden practices unfolded, acts so extreme, so morally ambiguous, that even the fiercest chroniclers avoided describing them. These rituals were never meant to be witnessed by ordinary servants or lesser nobles. They were the domain of those who believed themselves untouchable, individuals convinced that their proximity to the throne placed them above judgment. The existence of these chambers was concealed through architectural misdirection. Corridors appeared to end abruptly, walls disguised hidden entrances, and guards rotated in irregular patterns to confuse anyone who might try to map the palace's true layout. Only those personally summoned by the king or his highest advisors received permission to descend into these depths. And for those who entered, the transformation was immediate. The atmosphere thickened with incense, whose scent was foreign to the public rituals, carrying undertones intended to lower inhibitions and heighten the participants' receptiveness to whatever unfolded next. Inside, the line between devotion and excess was deliberately blurred. The elite engaged in practices meant to symbolize dominion, sacrifice, and the merging of human will with divine mandate. Objects of spiritual significance were repurposed into instruments of power, and sacred myths were reenacted with an intensity that eclipsed the traditional religious ceremonies practiced throughout the city. These rituals served a dual purpose. They reinforced the participants' belief that they operated on a higher plane than ordinary citizens, and they bound them together through shared secrets too dangerous to reveal. The deeper one's involvement, the more impossible it became to escape the system without risking destruction. Some rituals focused on testing limits, not of loyalty, but of moral boundaries. Participants were encouraged to transgress societal norms, believing such acts demonstrated their willingness to transcend ordinary restraint. Others involved symbolic dominance over staged captives or animals, reflecting the belief that power must be exercised, not merely claimed. These events were justified as spiritual necessities, reenactments of cosmic battles described in Babylonian mythology. But beneath the religious veneer, their true function was unmistakable. They served as a mechanism for consolidating influence, ensuring that those who shared in these acts were equally implicated, equally compromised, and therefore equally controlled. Even among the elite, not everyone participated willingly. Some were coerced through social expectation, others through fear that refusal would mark them as disloyal. And once a noble or advisor entered this hidden world, their silence became a second form of obedience. Secrets became chains, participation became currency, and the palace's upper ranks grew increasingly entangled in a system where morality bowed to ambition and ambition bowed to the throne. These forbidden practices did more than bind the elite. Together, they created fractures. Some participants emerged emboldened, convinced they had ascended to a higher status. Others left troubled, shaken by what they had witnessed, but unable to speak. These emotional divides sowed tension within the palace, deepening rivalries and fueling suspicions that would later erupt in ways the king could not fully anticipate. If this glimpse into the hidden depths of Babylon's elite raises questions in your mind, share your thoughts in the comments and tell me what you believe drove such secrecy among those who claim to hold absolute power, as your perspective helps illuminate the shadows we continue to uncover. As the clandestine rituals of the elite grew increasingly bold, another consequence began to surface, one that few within the palace dared to acknowledge openly. Those who witnessed these forbidden acts, whether by accident or by being reluctantly drawn into the orbit of the elite, carried a burden far heavier than any official. Punishment. The Babylonian courts had no tolerance for loose threads, and anyone who saw what they were not meant to see became a liability in the eyes of those who guarded the kingdom's darkest secrets. It was not the act of witnessing itself that provoked danger, but the possibility that a single unguarded word could unravel the delicate structure holding the palace's power in place. Servants were the most vulnerable. Their silent movement through the corridors placed them perilously close to information they were never meant to hear. A misaligned door, a forgotten curtain, or a momentary delay could lead them to glimpse rituals or interactions reserved only for the highest ranks. When this occurred, consequences were swift and unforgiving. Some servants were quietly reassigned to distant posts, effectively removed from palace life. Others were detained under the guise of re-education, where they were subjected to psychological pressure intended to erase their memories, or at least render them too afraid to speak. These disappearances were rarely publicized. Instead, they blended seamlessly into the palace's daily rhythm, creating an atmosphere where silence became instinctual. Nobles, however, faced a different kind of threat. Their status protected them from sudden erasure, but it did not shield them from suspicion. A noble who reacted with discomfort or hesitation after inadvertently witnessing a forbidden practice risked being labeled unstable or potentially subversive. In such cases, the court often employed a more sophisticated strategy. Rather than remove the noble entirely, advisors manipulated circumstances so that the individual became increasingly isolated. Invitations dwindled, alliances shifted. Rumors spread quietly, reshaping perceptions without ever targeting the person directly. This gradual erosion of influence served as both a warning and a containment strategy, reminding the rest of the court that knowledge was a double-edged blade. There were rare cases where individuals attempted to confront the system, driven either by moral conviction or sheer desperation. These attempts never ended well. The palace hierarchy was designed to absorb dissent before it reached the throne. Intermediaries intercepted complaints, rephrased them, or buried them entirely. Those who pressed the issue too far found themselves the subjects of discreet investigations, their motives questioned, their loyalties dissected. And once the court labeled someone as a potential disruptor, their fate became inevitable. They were removed not through dramatic confrontation, but through a series of subtle setbacks that dismantled their relevance piece by piece. The fear of accidental knowledge became a powerful tool of control. Servants lowered their gaze more quickly. Nobles avoided lingering near restricted corridors. Even seasoned advisors learned to tread carefully, aware that navigating the palace required not only political skill, but an acute understanding of what not to see. This culture of caution suffocated genuine communication, replacing openness with strategic silence. Conversations became rehearsed, gestures calculated, expressions controlled. The palace transformed into a place where truths were known but never spoken, where secrets accumulated like dust in corners no one dared to clean. And beneath this blanket of silence, an even more treacherous system grew. One that turned suspicion into strategy and information into a resource more valuable than loyalty. It was a network designed not just to protect secrets, but to weaponize them, allowing the most cunning individuals to reshape the palace's power structure from the shadows. As fear tightened its hold on the palace and silence became a survival tactic, a new structure emerged in the Babylonian courts, one far more calculated, far more deliberate, and infinitely more dangerous. It was an underground network of espionage built not upon formal law or royal decree, but upon the ambitions and insecurities of those who lived closest to the throne. This network did not operate through official spies or military intelligence. Instead, it relied on individuals from every level of court life, each motivated by a unique blend of fear, desire, and opportunism. Information became the most valuable currency in Babylon, and those who controlled it wielded power that often exceeded their rank. The foundation of this shadow system was simple: observe everything, report selectively, and manipulate strategically. Servants listened behind curtains as they prepared garments or delivered food. Guards lingered near intersections where nobles whispered in haste. Advisors employed their personal scribes to monitor conversations disguised as administrative tasks. Even entertainers, musicians, and healers were sometimes drawn into the web, their presence in private chambers positioning them perfectly to gather details others could not access. Each member of this network understood the risk. To be caught spying meant destruction, yet to remain uninformed meant vulnerability. Nobles learned quickly that their rivals were watching not just their actions, but their reactions. A momentary pause in a council meeting, an expression of doubt during a ritual, a delay in responding to a summons. All of these were interpreted, recorded, and relayed. The most skilled manipulators weaponized this system to orchestrate the downfall of competitors. Without ever lifting a blade, a well-timed rumor could erode an alliance. A strategically incomplete report could distort the king's perception of a loyal servant. Those who mastered these subtleties became silent architects of the court's shifting balance, crafting narratives that served their interests while appearing entirely organic. Yet even those who benefited from the system were not immune to its dangers. The network fed on paranoia, and no one could be certain who was watching whom. Information passed through so many intermediaries that origins became impossible to trace. False reports circulated as easily as truthful ones, leaving the court suspended in a fog where certainty was rare and trust was non-existent. This climate allowed ambitious individuals to act boldly, but it also destabilized the foundation of palace governance. Decision-making became reactionary, shaped less by strategy and more by fear of unseen threats. The king himself was both the ultimate beneficiary and the ultimate victim of this machinery. On one hand, the network allowed him to maintain an omnipresent influence, giving him access to whispers that would otherwise remain hidden. On the other hand, he became increasingly reliant on advisors whose interpretations of these whispers shaped his understanding of the court. Each layer of information passed through filters of bias and ambition, meaning that the king's perception of reality grew more distorted over time. As a result, loyalty became a matter of perception rather than truth, and decisions that affected the fate of entire families could hinge on incomplete or manipulated reports. This system of espionage thrived because it aligned perfectly with the culture of the palace. Fear kept information flowing, ambition kept participants engaged, and secrecy ensured that the network remained invisible to those who could potentially dismantle it. But such a structure could not sustain itself indefinitely. The weight of accumulated suspicion, the strain of constant manipulation, and the erosion of genuine trust created fractures too deep for the palace to ignore. Beneath the surface, the entire system inched toward collapse, driven not by external enemies, but by the internal decay born from its own methods. And it was within these fractures, these silent pressures and hidden tensions, that the final secret of the Babylonian courts emerged. The secret that revealed how a kingdom built on ritual, fear, and illusion ultimately sowed the seeds of its own decline. As the Babylonian courts spiraled deeper into their own contradictions, the final and most devastating truth emerged. The system that had once sustained their power gradually became the very force that dissolved it from within. The layers of ritual, surveillance, secrecy, and fear had been constructed to preserve the throne, but over time they reshaped the palace into a place where trust could not grow and stability could not survive. Nobles spent more energy defending themselves against invisible rivals than strengthening the kingdom. Advisors filtered information through personal agendas until the king ruled over illusions rather than reality. Servants operated in a constant state of vigilance, their silence becoming another form of resistance. What had begun as a structure designed to protect authority had transformed into a labyrinth of mutual suspicion. The forbidden rituals of the elite, once intended to bind them, together fractured them instead. Those who embraced the darkest practices believed their participation elevated them, placing them in a realm above ordinary morality. Yet that same sense of superiority isolated them from the rest of the court, creating divides impossible to bridge. Others, tormented by guilt or fear, withdrew into caution, weakening alliances that once formed the backbone of palace stability. As these emotional ruptures deepened, cracks formed in the very hierarchy that had long appeared unshakable. The espionage network, too, began devouring itself. When every whisper might be a trap and every gesture might be misinterpreted, meaningful cooperation became nearly impossible. Decisions grew erratic, shaped by the shifting tides of rumor rather than measured strategy. Opportunities for reform disappeared beneath layers of denial and paranoia. Even threats from outside the kingdom were underestimated or ignored, not because they lacked importance, but because the internal chaos demanded constant attention. The palace no longer functioned as the mind of the empire. It became a battlefield of egos, each driven by fear disguised as ambition. And in this climate, the king stood increasingly alone. Surrounded by advisors whose counsel was shaped by self-preservation, he struggled to distinguish loyalty from manipulation. His reliance on secrecy and ritual distanced him from the realities of governance. The more he tightened his control, the more the system resisted him, until authority itself became a performance rather than a force. The court continued to project an image of grandeur, yet beneath that facade, instability spread like cracks beneath polished stone. It was not a sudden collapse, but a slow erosion, the kind that becomes visible only when it is too late to reverse. In the end, the most hidden secret of the Babylonian courts was not a single ritual, punishment, or conspiracy. It was the realization that power built entirely on fear cannot endure. Fear may control behavior, but it cannot inspire loyalty. It cannot build unity. And once fear becomes the foundation, every structure above it begins to shift, eventually sinking under its own weight. The courts that once believed themselves untouchable found themselves undone. not by external enemies, but by the consequences of their own methods. If you stayed with me through this entire descent into the hidden world of Babylon's elite, leave a comment with the phrase, "I stayed," until the end, so I know you were here for every layer of this story. And if this journey through ancient power taught you something valuable, consider subscribing to keep exploring these forgotten worlds with me, and leave a like to show that these deep dives matter to you. There is another video waiting just beside this one that expands on these themes, so if you feel the pull of curiosity, click through and continue this exploration at your own pace.